9/11, the attack, unprovoked, unsolicited attack, by the way, upon us on 9/11 has changed the way we live in this country. The Patriot Act is an example of that. There has been much criticism and much favor attributed to the Patriot Act, and I am among the latter group. I favor the Patriot Act. I think the Patriot Act has served us well. Now, sometimes we may have to give up a liberty or two.
It reminds you again of Benjamin Franklin's favorite statement. He said, if you give up your civil liberties for greater security, you don't deserve either your liberty or your security.
I think that, you know, there are a lot of things that Americans are quite prepared to live with for the sake of security, including inconveniences at airports and things like that. I think when you begin talking about tapping telephone calls, about getting bank records and things like that without some kind of court order, I think most Americans are very, very uncomfortable about that.
The Judiciary Committee issued subpoenas for documents related to President Bush's program involving eavesdropping without warrants after Bush claimed authority to order this in his role as Commander-in-Chief following the September 11th attack. The Vice President's office refused to cooperate.
I've never known an administration so willing to operate outside the law, even to operate against the law, in violation of the law, as this administration. Certainly not since I've been old enough to vote that we had an administration so willing to ignore the law. Well, I want the American public to know exactly what they did.
The Patriot Act, the most abominable, unconstitutional, hateful, from the point of freedom, piece of legislation since the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798.
Policies that have been implemented here in the United States in the name of anti-terrorism do have serious repercussions for civil liberties, and I am among those who are certainly concerned about restrictions on civil liberties, whether they come in the form of legislation like the Patriot Act or data mining and things of that nature.
We live in America that spies on its citizens without warrants. We live in an America that can read our emails and check our bank accounts without a warrant. We live under a regime that took away our rights to habeas corpus and due process. And thus, anybody that George Bush says is a terrorist, they can do this to. I'm just waiting for my turn.
Any form of control, anything that heightens governmental control of the population, to me is potentially destructive. And something of that nature, ID, smart chip, I don't think the benefits are going to be worth the potential consequences.
The question is, have you been engaged in espionage?
My answer to that question, Senator, is a citation from the Fifth Amendment. No person shall be compelled to be a witness against himself.
The American nation cannot, must not, and will not permit the establishment of another communist government.
You have this craziness on each society. In the Soviet Union, Stalin created the same hysteria fighting against terrorism and the enemies of the people, the McCarthyism trying to do the same. It's very similar now with this anti-terrorist hysteria.
And again, the fascinating thing about the Patriot Act is how long it had been in the works. 9/11 had simply all of a sudden offered these rather unscrupulous people unbelievable opportunities, and they went back and simply hit the print button on their computer. It was there and ready to go.
They did take full advantage of it. The Patriot Act must have been written in advance because it was submitted to Congress only days after 9/11. There's no way such a large piece of legislation could be prepared in that amount of time.
John Ashcroft told the House Judiciary Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee the Patriot Act was so important that they didn't have time to read the statute before they could vote on it. Imagine that. Two members of the Senate claim they read it, and one of them is now dead, Paul Wellstone. He voted against it. Russ Feingold says he read it. He voted against it. Ron Paul and his colleagues in the House were given 15 minutes on the House intranet, the internal internet for members of Congress and their staffs, to read the Patriot Act. It's 315 pages long, and it doesn't read like a novel. I have read it. I have read it twice. In order to read it, you have to have in front of you the entire United States Criminal Code, because most of the Patriot Act says in 14 U.S.C. 1523, move the comma, change or to and, change 6 months to 8 months. It will take days to read this. Members of the House, without having had the opportunity to read it at all in any way, never mind meaningful in any way, nevertheless, with no debate on the floor, fearing what John Ashcroft told them, voted for the Patriot Act, and it passed, and the Senate voted for it, and with 2 dissents, it passed, and the President signed it.
We in the Judiciary Committee conducted, I believe, 11 or 12 public hearings. Our subcommittee, the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security, we were involved with 9 public hearings. And when some of the opponents of the Patriot Act contend that this was not thoroughly examined, that's hogwash. It was very thoroughly examined as a result of 11 hearings.
The Patriot Act was being debated openly and publicly until the anthrax scare. And in the anthrax scare, all bets were off. New provisions were added into what was the version of the Patriot Act that came out of the House Judiciary Committee. And it was so hastily put together and the vote so hastily scheduled that not enough copies had been printed by the White House printing office for every member of Congress to have received it.
Now you may say, well, what about the First Amendment? The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. But the Patriot Act says if you tell anyone, your spouse, your lawyer, your priest, your best friend, a judge in a federal courtroom, that's right, every challenge of the Patriot Act has been an anonymous challenge, because if you reveal to a judge in a courtroom that you received one of these self-written search warrants, you'll be arrested when you walk outside the courtroom. Congress just forgot about the First Amendment.
Then all of these various delicts have been compounded by the Patriot Act that added new exemptions, new clauses, new gimmicks that simply make our police and intelligence services less accountable.
What about the Fourth Amendment? What about the requirement of a judge before the government can get information from a financial institution? Congress said, forget about it. The times are too tough. It's too difficult. We don't want another 9/11.
The President chose to do secretively, to order the National Security Agency to begin to carry out a massive collection of information against American citizens, clear violations of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the FISA Act that you were referring to, of 1978, which was also intended to get around Article 4 of the Constitution, illegal intrusions into our lives, and to at least provide some kind of court sanction.
Various forms of spying that the current administration has pretty much admitted to engaging in, and the way that they always admit it, is quite interesting too, because it's always for our safety.
Here's the bargain. Give me your freedom and I'll keep you safe. It has never worked. It makes us less free and unsafe.